Welcome back. In this video we're going to start adding some more micro details to both our colour map and also to our bump map. So at the moment, if you look at our wood grain, we're not really getting traditional grain. We're getting these long striations, and if it wasn't for the fact that we knew it was wood, you could zoom in on this and maybe this would give you the impression that it's folded fabric, if it wasn't for the reflections, that is. So we want to add a little bit more granular detail to this. And we're going to do that with a Voronoi texture. So I'm just going to go and grab a Voronoi texture. We need some texture coordinates. Now we already have some texture coordinates coming out of here just before ring width. I'm just going to grab those and plug them into our vectors over here. And if we want to tidy this up, we can just add a redirect and move this down. I'll maybe move this up a little bit as well. Add another redirect in here just to make everything really clear, a little bit easier to follow. So with this Voronoi texture, we want to do a couple of things to it. For the moment, we have this effect. It isn't too bad. We do have our z-axis taken away from that multiply node that we used. And the next thing we want to do is we want to grab a vector distortion node and put that in on front. We're getting a nice bit of distortion there. There's not too much distortion in that. You can see as we put this up, we can get a lot of distortion. And again, this distortion, because we're using this vector, is based on this length. So you can see we get less distortion in the middle than we do on the outside, which is fine. We don't have to worry too much about that. Now what we do want to do is we want to change over to 2D. And let's take that distortion way down, because this distortion is going to be a really, really low value. It might only be about 0.01 when we get to it, because we're going to take this scale and we're going to make this really high. I'm going to take that up to about 150. And if you look at this from above, you can see with just a little bit of vector distortion, this gets really, really distorted. Now we can take this scale down maybe to about 1. And you can see we get away with a little bit more distortion now. It doesn't really affect things too much. With this scale really high, things get really out of hand. And what we want to be able to do is adjust the scale of this independently. So I think the way it is just now is giving us quite a nice grain look. So I don't think we really need to do any more work on that. But we could, if we wanted to, build out some more controls for this, just using something like a math node and setting this to scale. And if we increase this scale up, you can see we get more of these dots, but it's also going to scale everything in this vector. So the noise map and everything else. So everything should scale together and we shouldn't get any issues. So we'll maybe take this scale to about 5 for the moment. I think that might be a little bit high. Let's have a look at our grain. That grain actually looks pretty good. So I think we'll keep the setup that we have here. I don't think we need to adjust that. One thing that we do want to do is we want to adjust the look of these little dots. So if we go to our top view, we'll just hit 7 and then period on the number pad and zoom in. Maybe these are a little bit too small. We'll try 100 in here for the scale. At the moment, we can still see pretty clearly that we have that cell structure from the Voronoi texture. And this is something that we've dealt with before. We're going to use a map range node. I'll just lock this into place. And what we want to do is adjust the from min and from max so they're quite close together. So if I put in something like 0.3 here and 0.4 here, you can see now we have little circles. And that's just exactly what we want. But let's say we want to increase the size of the circle. So we'll increase this up. Once we get to the value in the second one, it changes to white, and then we have to go and increase the other one. It would be good if we had one single control for that. And we can do that really easy with a math node. We'll change this to add, and we'll just add something like 0.1 between these. And then we'll get another node. We'll duplicate this across. We'll change this to multiply. Put a value of 1 in here. Put a value of 0.3. We'll plug this into from min, which is already at 0.3. We'll put it into our add. So 0.3 plus 0.1 is 0.4. We'll plug that into 0.4. So now what we have is a control for the size of our circles. We can get that and dial it in, and then we have a control for the amount of fall off. So we can really dial both of these values in exactly the way we want. So maybe something like 0.17 in here is a decent amount of fall off to still have circles without really going too much into that cell shape. You can see it in some places, but not others. I think that should look okay. So we'll look at our grain from the side. And I think that looks nice and detailed. And this should work pretty fine. If we want, we could also change our 2 min and 2 max values. If we adjust these, we can make this much more contrasty. But I think where it is just now is going to work fine for us. What we do need to do is add in another mixed color node. So we'll just duplicate this, move it over here. We'll change this to multiply, and we'll plug this directly in slot B. And let's have a look at our result. So now we have this grain. We'll increase this factor up a bit. And that's pretty much what we're going for. We're just getting these vertical striations down our wood. If we look at it from the top, far away the ring doesn't necessarily look that different. If we zoom in, we can see all these little micro dots all over the surface. And that's pretty much what we're going for. Now maybe the scale is still a little bit too low. We'll change this scale down here to 3. And maybe we'll increase the size of these dots just a little bit. Put that back up to 0.3. Maybe take this scale down to about 75. And just have a look. I think I like that better at 100. And I think that looks pretty good. Now we're also going to be using this as a bump map, which we're going to do in a couple of videos time. But for the moment, I think it's challenge time. Okay, it's challenge time. Your challenge in this video is to, first of all, tidy up your node tree. So we've added a few nodes and hopefully you've got into the habit of keeping it tidy as you go along. Next, add some frames where necessary. So we created a group of about 7 or 8 nodes in this video. Just select them all and add that frame. Remember, it's Ctrl J. And try giving your frames a colour. Also, check the settings for your frames and see if you can find the setting to change the size of the labels as well. So pause the video, have a go at that, and join me in a moment and I'll show you how I would do it. Okay, so I hope you got on fine with that last challenge. So framing nodes, pretty simple. We're just going to select all these nodes, hit Ctrl J to frame those, hit F2, and we'll give this a label. This is going to be our micro dots. Now, one thing I also mentioned in that challenge was changing the size of the text on the labels. So you can see in some cases, the text on these labels is pretty big and some of them aren't quite so big. If we go into our node tab at the side and go to properties, we can find this setting for label size and we can increase that as we see fit. Now, one thing I like to do is pretty much take all these labels and make them the maximum size. I find it much easier when I'm able to see exactly what's in a group from far away. So I'll just go through and increase the label size on all of those. And the other thing that I find very useful is color coding these frames. Now I don't know how well this is shown up on the video, but for me on my monitor, I can barely see this frame at all. It's basically black on dark grey, or maybe dark grey with an even darker grey frame. But it's really hard to see. So I'm going to start going through and just changing the colour of some of these. So this first one I'm going to take and I'm going to make like a kind of purple colour. And that's because this is purely dealing with vector math. So I like to put that separate than things dealing with colour or bump maps or roughness. Now this frame's a little bit trickier because this is affecting vectors. We are inputting a vector to the frame and we're outputting a value which is affecting a vector. So this is a good candidate for also getting that purple colour. But in this case, I'm going to give it a lighter purple colour just to differentiate it from the main vector stream. Now the ring width is a tricky one because this, although it is dealing with vectors, we're inputting a vector and we're outputting a value, and the value then goes into ring creation. And we're starting to get into that area where we're going straight into our colour. And it really starts with the ring width. So in this case, I'm going to take the colour here and I'm going to make this yellow. And the same with ring creation. I'm going to make this yellow as well. And we have a few nodes here that essentially deal with the colour. I'm going to just line up these 3 mix colour nodes. And I'm going to give these a frame as well. Control J. And we'll just change the label to these to colour mix. And again, I'll just increase that label size up a bit. And we'll change that colour to yellow. Now in this case, you can see that colour mix is appearing behind my nodes when I'm very far away, which makes it a bit hard to read. So here's another little tip for you. If you uncheck this shrink, we can move a node within our node group to change the size of a frame, and it will not jump back to its original size. If we have shrink checked and we move a node, once we move it back, the frame will change size again. So this can make it really easy to just move your text up a little bit, move your node back, and now we can see that text from far away. And you can do that with any of these other ones. Now, one thing to bear in mind is if you do turn off shrink, and then you move a node much further than you meant to, you have to go back in and you have to hit shrink to move that back. So just bear that in mind, just be careful with that setting. For the micro dots, again, I think in this case, I'm just going to leave this as white for the moment, and the same with this colour variance, just to differentiate them from these other colour nodes. These are almost creating little masks or maps to change other settings. So with some of these nodes colour coordinated, that's going to look pretty good. Now later on we will be adding some more nodes in for roughness and also for our normal map. So we will have a few other colours in here for these different frames. But I think it's a good idea to start taking the time to colour coordinate your nodes early on so that you can see them from a distance. Now in the next video we're going to add some more micro details, this time in the form of saw marks. I'll see you then.